This is the World War III update. I have some bad news. We're going to be going to war with Iran, and it is going to start much sooner than people think. We will be in a state of high-intensity conflict with the nation of Iran, not its proxies, the actual state of Iran, before the U.S. election. Mark my words, unequivocally, resolutely, we will be engaged in a full-blown war. What we are witnessing right now has all the hallmarks of classic Pentagon upsurging escalation in the Middle East, with a war with a Middle Eastern country, as we've seen time and time again. And I'm going to be sharing my own unique perspective and connecting some dots, because we're about to witness a nuclear proliferation crisis that is very reminiscent of what we've seen in the weapons of mass destruction scare in Iraq. And the groundwork for this narrative has already been firmly laid, and it is already playing out. And what the United States is about to do with their retaliatory strikes, some are suggesting that they may in fact target the Iranian Navy in the Persian Gulf, which would be a declaration of war. If they do that, things are going to happen much quicker than the election. Either way, they don't want to de-escalate. They want to escalate this. And people might say, well, wouldn't this create a firestorm of chaos throughout the Middle East that would have repercussions on every other theater of conflict in the world? Absolutely. And I will say, never underestimate the gall of a dying empire. Never underestimate an empire that's in its monetary death throes. When it's kicking and screaming and they got nothing left to lose, they will go for broke, they will burn the boats, and they will go to war with Iran. This is the big one. This is the mother of all wars, and it's about to start. I'm going to be detailing exactly why I believe there's going to be a nuclear proliferation crisis that centers around the Iranians' pursuit of nuclear weapons, or alleged pursuit of nuclear weapons. But first, we're just going to quickly go over the headlines, and then I'm going to go into a deeper dive with respect to that as well. All countries in NATO within the past 2 to 3 weeks have started to talk about conscription, compulsory, mandatory service, or expanding the military, or reducing eligibility requirements, entrance requirements, the criteria required to enter the military. The United States have already scrapped certain criteria that would allow people to enter the military who otherwise couldn't. And I do think that a lot of this has to do with exploiting the many people who are seeking full-blown citizenship status, those immigrants, of course, who might be seeking permanent residency. I believe that this is going to be leveraged because they know that people aren't going to want to join the military unless they sweeten the deal a little bit, unless they make some promises that they probably aren't going to be able to keep, because let's face it, the economy is in the pisser, and we're barely going to be able to afford to pay for everybody's Social Security and retirement when the time comes, when the Generation X have to retire. I mean, who's going to be paying the bills at that point in time? So I'm sure they're going to make a bunch of promises that they can't keep. And if they do send you off to the front lines in a World War III, there's a good chance you ain't coming back anyways. We're going to talk a little bit more about my theory as to why they are trying to lower the standards in terms of getting into the military. Russia wants nuclear weapons in Cuba, according to some Russian MPs. We have NATO getting ready to roll out the military Schengen, which is opening a military corridor throughout Europe to allow them to expedite the delivery of military equipment without being inhibited by various bureaucratic red tape that might prevent the movement of military equipment expeditiously across nation states within the European Union. So they're doing this, of course, in the run-up to World War III. So in the same time that they're trying to expand their militaries, they're trying to get the logistics hashed out. Now, I don't understand how they think they're going to fight a conventional war with the Russians and that it's not just going to immediately go nuclear. But hey, anything can happen this day and age. Maybe they know something about nuclear weapons that the rest of us don't. The U.S., of course, is preparing a retaliatory strike. By the time you watch this video, there is a good chance that that will already have been initiated. They're saying that it's going to be multi-phased, that it's going to be broad. Some people are saying it's going to be on the level of shock and awe. I think the worst case scenario I've heard is that they will be targeting the Iranian Navy, some warships in the Persian Gulf, which seems insane to me if they do that, because there's no way that is going to de-escalate the situation. There's no way that anything they do at this point in time is just going to be something that the other side views as an equivocating move, and they're just going to say, okay, now we're even. And that's not going to happen, okay? If the United States wanted to de-escalate this situation, they very well could. They easily could. The fact that we're there in the first place is indicative of the fact that we don't, okay? They have every intention of going to full-blown war with Iran. Mark my words. 40% of Germans are stocking up. I've been receiving messages that people are panic buying in Europe. I'll share some of those messages with you in certain European countries. Even the Young Turks, of all people, that leftist media organization, the progressive media organization, they are even talking about survivalism skills, survival and evasion training in a positive light, which is very strange. Okay, typically this is a marker that is cornered by the right wing. But now, even the left is talking about not just preparedness, but survival and evasion training to prepare for civil war. I'm telling you, times are definitely changing. The media coverage of the current ongoing Middle Eastern crisis in Iran is quite indicative of a prescribed agenda that is currently unrolling. We'll talk about that as well. In the Gaza Strip, they are currently eating pets. They are hunting cats and dogs for sustenance. There is famine, there is disease, there is flooding. Most people who have been removed from their homes have been forced to live in tents that have been flooded out due to the crazy weather that is currently happening there. This while under constant bombardment and constant attack. So when I get messages from people whining because perhaps, I don't know, something is wrong in their life in the Western world, I just want you to imagine when you're contemplating your first world problems that you're looking at your neighbor's cat and you want to eat it and you're completely demoralized, you're soaking wet, your feet are rotting, half the people you know are dead or injured, you're probably sick, you're hungry, you're starving, you don't know when you're going to die next. And then imagine that you're not that, and then tell me how big your problem actually seems. If you live in the United States or Canada or the Western world, you have absolutely no excuse in this day and age, zero excuse whatsoever to make the absolute best of yourself. What we are witnessing right now in the Gaza Strip is a social, psychological experiment of collapse. And I sometimes have to ask myself, is this really just an experiment to see how this is going to go down around the world when it happens? Because never before have you a situation where people are confined, millions of people confined to a very small space where aid trucks are not able to enter, okay, and people are not able to leave, and it's dog eat dog, and they're under constant bombardment, and you're really trying to see when are people going to reach that breaking point? When do those religious and cultural and ideological bonds just get severed and go out the window? Even with a very strong collectivist society, a very proud people who's accustomed to that level of suffering, when do they break? And when do things turn cannibalistic? It's a grim, ugly, grisly situation, and the UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, what a coincidence that on the same day that the International Criminal Court of Justice decides that it's going to pursue this genocide case, that this happens where they suspend all aid to this agency because of 12 workers or something like that who are loosely affiliated with these terrorist organizations. Isn't that interesting? Anyways, let's talk a bit about what's about to happen in Iran. Recall that back in October, I notified you that House Resolution 559 had passed. This was a summary of that resolution. The House of Representatives declared that it is the policy of the United States that a nuclear Islamic Republic of Iran is not acceptable, that Iran must not be able to obtain a nuclear weapon under any circumstances or conditions, to use all means necessary to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, and to recognize and support the freedom of action of partners and allies, including Israel, to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Now, David Albright, a former UN weapons inspector, has advised the Biden administration not to target Iran directly out of fear that they are going to accelerate their nuclear program and potentially make nuclear weapons. He claims that they have the material necessary to make a nuclear weapon within a week, and that they can make 5 within a month and 12 within 6 months. And so he's saying you need to exercise extreme amounts of caution, okay? And this is the cover story, right? Exercise extreme amounts of caution because they might make a nuclear weapon. Well, are they just setting the narrative groundwork for that very thing so that they can come out and say, now, after we've done this retaliatory strike, whatever they do, whether it's just the proxies in Iraq and Syria, which of course is just going to generate another counterattack from that side, are they going to be able to say, well, now that we've pissed them off, there's a good chance that they're going to want nuclear weapons, so now we have to attack them. I'm thinking that this is going to be the progression of the narrative from this point forward, and this House Resolution 559 just set the groundwork for all of that to take shape. Now what you have is a situation where you're sending, I don't know how many, like a dozen Stratotankers now, in addition to the ones that have already been there. You've been shipping weapons after weapons into Israel, into Saudi Arabia, like crazy for the past year, particularly in the last 3 months. So you got all your warships in position, okay? And yes, while you don't have the manpower for any sort of ground offensive per se, you still have the ability to get in a shooting match with the Iranians. And I would put nothing past these people at this point in time. Because understand, at the end of the day, the biggest enemy that the United States has is the Chinese, the ones with the other $30 trillion gross domestic product market. It's the Chinese. We must keep that in mind at all times. Yes, the Russians have a lot of nuclear weapons, but guess what? So do the Chinese, and unlike the Russians, we don't know how many the Chinese have. The Chinese have a much larger population. They have a much larger gross domestic product, and while they're having their own problems with Evergrande and their own financial system, the Chinese is going to be all right, okay? This is a collectivist society, one of the oldest in the world. They ain't going anywhere, no matter what people like Peter Zion says. So this is why, if they can bankrupt the Chinese through taking out Iran, through attriting Russia, and making the Chinese machine grind to a halt because it doesn't have any oil to lubricate it, then I think that's something that they're willing to do. That's a bridge they're willing to burn. Even if it means empty Walmarts, empty Costco's, a war with Taiwan, a war on the Korean Peninsula, I think that this is going to be one of their last plays because they know the US dollar it's in its death throes. And they're going to do anything they can. And this is probably one of the few moves that actually, from a strategic point of view, it might make sense. Now, obviously, this is going to have blowback for the American economy as well, undoubtedly. It's going to create inflation, but I think this could be the trigger to potentially, in the wake of a dying petrodollar, nationalize the US oil so that we can price it differently, take it off the world market. The United States has an ample supply of oil, at least for the time being. And of course, there's always Venezuela that we can make friends with, which is probably going to be the primary place we get oil from in the future after we burn all the bridges over there. So I think that's what this is all about. They're going to start a war with Iran. That means that the Iranians are going to close the Strait of Hormuz. The Chinese are going to suffer greatly, as well as many other Eastern countries are going to suffer greatly. That will have repercussions on us as well. And if we know anything about this administration, I think right now they're willing to do anything to hold on to power, even though I don't think it's necessarily the politicians per se that are pulling the strings necessarily, and this is not conspiratorial. It's just you got to go where the money goes, right? It's the lobbyists, it's the multinational corporations, it's the BlackRocks of the world that are really running the show. But I do think that perhaps this administration has a lot to hide. And I'm thinking that when you have a situation like that, where you got squealers who don't want to go to jail, they'll do anything to make sure that they never see the inside of a cell. And I think that this could possibly mean taking us into a massive conflict, one which is unwinnable. There's no way we can win a war against Iran. We can't win a war against the Gaza Strip. Since the time of the war started on October 7th, they've only neutralized 20% of the Hamas tunnels. 20%. Remember when they were raving about their abilities to just flood them with seawater and that's what we're going to do, right? This Wile E. Coyote type stunt. And 20% of all of the bombs, the billions of dollars that they spent, the most advanced weaponry in the world, in a tiny confined space, which is the most surveilled, most tightly controlled, where you're starving the people to death, okay? And you still have only taken out 20% of the tunnel system. And you seriously think that the Iranians, who've been building vast underground bunker systems, that they likely do have, nuclear plants underground so that you can't get them even with nuclear weapons. You really think that you're going to get that anything short of like 100 ground burst nuclear weapons? And even that, what are you going to do? You're going to target Tehran with a nuke? They're never going to do that, right? They might try to target military facilities, but even then, if they utilize a sanction option in Iran, and then this is the problem, because what they're going to do is going to force Iran to respond. Not respond in the way they did when Soleimani was killed, when they called up Trump and they said, okay, get your guys out. We're going to shoot this military base. They told them the coordinates, exactly where they're going to shoot. They took it out. This won't be the same. The situation now is just, it's a fait accompli at this point. There's no turning back, especially because the United States doesn't want to turn back. So once the wheels get turning on this nuclear proliferation narrative that they're about to bring up, that's when Israel says, okay, Iran is a threat to our existence. House Resolution 559, we reserve the right to utilize the Samson option, and that's when Israel starts shooting nuclear weapons. The problem is, unless they hit everything, Iran's going to get a nuclear weapon, right? Because even if, when this war starts, Iran will continue. And this is the problem, is that unless you completely wipe out everything Iran has, like in the first couple weeks, the potential is there that they're going to come back and they're going to actually build a nuclear weapon and seek it out. The groundwork has already been set in terms of the International Atomic Energy Agency claiming that inspectors are not being let in, even though Iran claims that they're allowing inspectors in. So everything is there, okay? The crazy loudmouth Lindsey Graham that everybody is writing off as a nutter. Right now they are. For sure, right now they are. But just wait, okay? Wait until the next move, until the next play. Because there's 30,000 sitting ducks in the Middle East, and they're put there for the purpose of this very thing, escalating the conflict. If the United States practice even a modicum of aggressive diplomacy and negotiations, they absolutely could reach some sort of agreement to, in the very least, have a balance of power. And I'm quite certain that the Iranians would go for something like that. Okay? The problem is that nobody trusts anybody and everybody's paranoid. So long as there's a relationship of distrust, both sides are going to continue to pursue an arms race. And as such, that's what we have. We have the U.S. with all their sitting ducks, 30,000 troops, waiting to be taken out, used as bait, as Joel Skousen said, and that's what's going to happen. So expect that before the election, we will be in a state of war with Iran, I believe, 110%, full stop. I don't see, I mean, eventually we're going to be at war beyond a shadow of a doubt, but I don't even see how it takes that long for this situation to crest and for us to be fully committed into that conflict. All the playing pieces are in position. The motive is there. In my opinion, perhaps somebody might say, no, the chaos that it would create too much blowback and it would backfire on the United States. I don't think so. Because as much as we are concerned about EMP and nuclear weapons being dropped on us, at the end of the day, U.S. policymakers, they know that China is the force to be reckoned with in the future. And that if they don't act now to derail that train, they will quickly overtake us, in spite of whatever they say about the failing population and the collapsing economy and all this stuff. I mean, if you just look at any Chinese city and compare it to an American city, and you can believe whatever you want, right? But the reality, just look at like New York versus Shanghai. Look at the conditions of these cities and look at the debt loads of the Americans versus the Chinese. And then you ask yourself this question. We are telling ourselves that we're better off, right, than the Chinese. And in many cases, okay, we got a lot of resources. Maybe we have a little bit more gas in the tank to take us a little bit further. Sure. But on the surface, okay, anything is, there's nothing true about the idea that we are better off than the Chinese. I mean, one look at our derelict neighborhoods in the inner cities of any North American city confirms that. That shit just does not fly there, okay? So this idea that, I think what we're being sold by a lot of these Peter Zion types is this false sense of confidence in our system so that we don't seek to actively change it and we don't disturb whatever's going on with the military-industrial complex and how they've been doing things up until this point. And it's important to know that people like that do work for those people. And that is where their interests lie. Now, in terms of what's going on with military conscription, every place around the world, all of a sudden, the UK, Germany, Austria, the United States, all coming out and saying, we got to look into conscription, mandatory service. Apparently now they have removed the requirement for a high school diploma or a GED in order to enter the U.S. military. Now, as far as I know, there's a certain IQ threshold, I believe, for entering the U.S. military, and it's in the 80s, I believe. And basically, why they're doing this, I think, is because they're realizing they have this massive swell of immigrant populations who might even have post-secondary education in their home countries. But because it's not a one-to-one, and because it's not accepted here as being, equivalent to a high school diploma giving here or whatever the case is, they realize that in order to leverage this pool of potential applicants, they need to adjust the entry criteria. So I think that in a lot of these places, we are seeing this swell of immigrants, illegal or otherwise. They're going to make some exceptions to allow them into the service, and they're going to provide them with incentives like a fast track to residency, permanent residency, citizenship. That's the carrot that they're going to dangle, I do believe, because there's not enough people who are interested in signing up. It's the same people that people, the same reason why people don't want to have kids nowadays, okay? Everybody's just doing their own thing. We've had it good for too long, and we're about to get a reality check. Our only saving grace will be if the robots get here fast enough so that we don't have to do the work and we can just do it all remotely. And that's probably how they're going to entice people. I think I brought this up in a previous video, but if you guys ever seen the movie Toys with Robin Williams, that movie is incredibly prophetic, and everybody's forgotten about that one. In that movie, I think it was made in the early 90s, like 91 or something like that. In that movie, they basically had kids who they tricked into playing video games, but they were actually controlling military equipment. And it was very much like what we're seeing right now with the drone remote warfare. And I'm telling you, you got to go watch that movie if you really want to understand the programming, the subliminal priming that takes place, the predictive programming, as they call it, with Hollywood. And it's just astonishing, okay? I got a message from somebody from the Netherlands, and they're claiming that their government is advising people to prepare. The government is advising people to start prepping, they say. Some government officials are either hilariously unaware or trying to do damage control. They recommend having a flashlight and a glass of water. I hope he's joking when he says that. Well, one politician, Joost Eerdmans, admits to having months' worth of food and water. Yeah, if you are preparing for World War III, or they're telling you to prepare for World War III, and they're not saying stockpile 6 months worth of food, then you really have to question the sanity or whether or not they're serious. Because, you know, to prepare for something like that, I mean, you would need, it takes a lot. I mean, that is the worst of worst case scenario. Speaking of which, I gotta say, I'm not giving you guys the finger, but I got an infection on this finger recently, and I had to dip into my Jace medical kit under the supervision of my doctor, okay? I gotta say that as a disclaimer. But I got an infection. It was pussy and swollen and red. You could probably still see it on the screen. I'm seriously not giving you the finger. This isn't a gag, I swear. But I tell you, man, that ciprofloxacin, holy smokes. If this was the apocalypse, you got to get yourself some antibiotics. I might not have had a finger if I had this happen after the shit hits the fan. And if that thing went into my bloodstream and really messed me up, it could kill me. So get yourself Jace Medical. I mean, they have 800 medications that you can get, prescription from a doctor, 100% legal, okay? If you want to step up your medical kit, this is how you do it, all right? Everything from EpiPens to all kinds of, you know, just stuff that you need. Even ivermectin you can get if you're into that kind of stuff. But I would strongly recommend getting at least the antibiotics, because that is going to be a lifesaver, guys. And yeah, I mean, without it, I'm in very good health too. Not to toot my horn or anything, but you know, I seen this. I'm the kind of guy who doesn't like going to the doctor until I'm almost dead. But in this case, when I see my finger and significant others are saying, hey, your finger's going to fall off, and I say, all right, well, maybe give me some of those drugs over there, and the drugs work within 12 hours. That's a powerful antibiotic. Cipro, strongly recommend. But of course, I'm not giving any medical advice here. Always consult with your physician, and I'm not just saying that. I do sincerely mean that. You don't want to mess yourself up, okay? So anyways, getting back to this. People are, and I'll post a link for that in the description. I think you get 10% off if you go through my link in the description. Use coupon code Canadian Prepper. Affiliate link, okay, help support the channel. People are panic buying like crazy, he says, most likely as a result of Rob Bauer's recent statements. Prep Shop NL, one of the biggest prepper stores in this country, has almost completely sold out, especially on survival foods. Well, you know what? I know a place. It's called CanadianPreparedness.com, baby. 10% off. Use coupon code SurvivalPrepper. Free shipping in Canada and the United States if you spend over a certain amount. Anyways, and although many people here are ignorant or just naive, I now see people exercising with their bug-out bag or buying more food. Some politicians are pushing for a draft, of course. Since our military is in a pretty bad state, this of course worries me a little because as a fit 18-year-old, I am first on the list. Well, props to you for thinking about this so early in life. Now, apparently I was reading a recent, I think it was a valuetainment video I was watching, and he was citing a survey in which Gen Z are actually very concerned about the future, and they're one of the most interested target groups in terms of preparedness. So that's good to see that the young are starting to take this more seriously. The army is advertising massively on social media, but nobody wants to join. What a coincidence. Whenever I open Instagram, I am immediately bombarded with advertisements telling me to join the National Defense Force. Well, those ads are targeted and based on your previous search history, so they might just be catering to you, but I would not doubt that that's not generally the case. To make things worse, a Dutch general has stated that he is worried that most 17-year-olds that have chosen to serve for 1 year are unaware that they are actually secretly being trained to fight Russia. You probably ain't wrong about that, my friend. But just make sure you bring a hazmat suit, because I doubt the government is going to provide one for you. Anyways, he concludes his message here by suggesting that people go and practice at the shooting range and people are asking for guns because of the imminent war. Yeah, that is a big question, isn't it? When is the gun control question gonna arise here with respect to this preparation for war? When are they gonna put the guns back in our hands? You remember that iconic scene at the beginning of the Ukraine war where they were handing out guns to all the civilians and they were putting on the cover of Time magazine for these photo shoots? And apparently, a lot of those guns fell into the wrong hands, as we now know. But hey, anyways. Australia is also contemplating conscription. Another country contemplating conscription. What a surprise. A defense analyst suggests that Australia should consider reintroducing conscription, increase its troop numbers due to rising global tensions. Get a load of this. There is a policy to increase personnel in Australia, a country with, I think, respectable, like 30 million people or so, kind of similar to Canada, not quite as much. By the year, drum roll please, 2040. They're going to have 80,000 troops, or they hope to have 80,000 troops by 2040. They're done. Australia, you better learn to swim, because the Chinese, by the year 2040, are going to have 10,000 nuclear weapons. They're going to have an army of 5 million men. And we're just going to see how inefficient the West actually is at mustering in times of need. The only thing that is going to get us to bring up our numbers at this point in time is a gun to the head. That really is all that's going to, this is what they're doing in Ukraine, right? Nobody wants to join. They have to literally hunt people down, stuff them in the back of vans, and send them to the front line against their will. If you don't think it's going to happen here, think again, because that is the trial run. The Gaza Strip is the trial run, the social experiment for how we're all going to act when we're confined to the post-nuclear hellscape cities. And what's going on in Ukraine is how they're going to draft us all into this. Okay, that's the blueprint that's currently being written. Pentagon says that they don't want confrontation with Iran. U.S. defense officials told Reuters that if the U.S. is not preparing for an all-out war, what is the point of attacking Iran if you do something overtly? It means a major escalation for the Iranians. So yeah, what is the point if you're not trying to have a war with Iran? How do you not see this as a fait accompli once you cross that line, especially if you're going to target warships in the Persian Gulf? It's kind of like they've done this for 30 years and it hasn't worked. What makes us think this approach is actually going to yield different results? Do we just think that all of these militias who've attacked U.S. bases over 150 times since October 7th are just going to, realize the error of their ways from our perspective and then suddenly turn tail and head back to Iran and just call it a day? Come on. They want a major war. And unfortunately, Lindsey Graham is going to get his wish. I just hope that they can send him over there to fight on the front lines so we don't have to listen to him anymore. Now, some people are saying that these are the reasons why the USA won't attack Iran. And let's just try to play the devil's advocate with this, okay? Iran is already a nuclear threshold state capable of producing several warheads with its stockpile of enriched uranium. As I've already stated, yes, this is true. They do have the capability to create nuclear weapons. They have the deployment systems. They have a vast suite of ballistic missiles. They just launched 3 satellites, which extends the range and accuracy of said ballistic missiles. So they most definitely have the capability to do this. Is this enough to necessarily deter the United States, or is this the best thing that could ever happen? Will they finally actually have a nation that has proven weapons of mass destruction that they're up against? A nuclear nation in its infancy that they can get into a conflict with, and maybe even if they are to use that WMD, it is not going to be apocalyptic or world-ending. It might be very catastrophic, especially for Israel if they're able to slip one through. But recall, these guys are just masters of asymmetrical warfare. And if you're getting ready to wage an asymmetrical war with troop numbers in only the tens of thousands across the vast area of the Middle East, in spite of how many weapons you have in Saudi Arabia and whatever allies you might have in the Emirate States and Israel, I mean, I don't think that's a war you can win. But have we ever gotten into a war truly wanting to win that war? Really? I mean, have we ever actually thought that we are going to win any of these conflicts we get into? I don't think we really believe that we will. I think the goal has always been just try to diminish the other side as much as possible. And if we can diminish them more than they diminish us, then in the end, we'll call that a victory. The U.S. knows that an all-out war with Iran will open up new fronts in many places, like I said, and we can't forget about Lebanon. Apparently, we've already forgotten about it. But right now, there is more talk that there is movement of forces towards that border and that war could flare up at any minute and completely derail all this war with Iran stuff. But if that war begins, then yes, that just increases the likelihood that we will get into a war with Iran. I do think that it is going to happen before the election for a variety of reasons. All right. Now, the price of oil and gas could rise, as we stated, but I do believe that destroying China's economy, well, maybe only destroying ours by 50%, is enticing to some of the long-form, long-game globalists. All right. Now, Schengen, military Schengen, is a commonly used term. It's inspired by the EU's Schengen area, but designated to aid the free movement of military units and assets throughout Europe and the removal of bureaucratic barriers and the improvement of infrastructure to facilitate the movement of military materiel. Now, NATO is planning to establish a network of military corridors across Europe to bypass the complex regulations and the red tape that's typical with Western society, hindering the exchange of equipment and personnel. They're doing this, of course, to set up the logistical framework for the rapid deployment of forces and manpower and materiel when it comes time to go to war with the Russians. That's what this is all about. So we hear on the one hand, we need the logistical chain, and we also need to conscript the soldiers. And yeah, you guys should probably prepare with your radio on batteries, as Rob Bauer would say, okay? In recent weeks, many senior officials in European nations are urging citizens to prepare for a potential military confrontation with Russia. I mean, is this, okay, to play the devil's advocate, is that all just to scare them into supporting Ukraine more? I mean, it could be, right? Because Zelensky is now saying that World War III is going to happen unless the West doesn't help me. And interestingly, Alexei Arestovich, I actually reported this story, I think it was last year. Maybe it was, I think it might have been 2 years ago. But people need to be reminded of this fact and how Ukraine's potential nukes factor in here. They're thinking of building more nuclear power plants, all right? But they already have nuclear power plants. If the Ukrainians wanted, they could build nuclear weapons. And it may well be that very reason why the Russians haven't dropped a nuke. Because they know that unless they drop several and immediately decapitate Kiev, then Kiev is likely going to start building its own nuclear weapons, probably with the help of NATO. What's Russia going to do, right? Attack NATO? Sure, maybe. And then this is where this whole business of, well, Ukraine's not in NATO. I mean, look, this idea that Ukraine is not in NATO is just stupid at this point. Ukraine gets more money from NATO than any NATO country. They have more weapons from NATO than any other NATO country. Now, while they're not the best weapons, for obvious reasons, we can't keep kidding ourselves into playing these semantic games. You know, this idea that, oh, well, if you join NATO, it's going to be a problem, that's going to be a red line. I don't even think the Russians believe that anymore. They know what time it is, but they're going to play the political game anyways and pretend like these terms matter when you're already a de facto NATO member through and through. Kiev is claiming that they have 900,000 soldiers in their military now. 900,000. Now, I'm guessing that it's very much how, like, the urban planners in Canada inflate their numbers by including outlying communities that aren't really a part of the metropolis, the metropolitan area, but they lump them in anyways. So I'm guessing that of this 900,000, you probably got 200,000 support, administrative, cooks, cleaners. I mean, just, you know, people who are not fighting in the conflict. Probably half of these people are not actual soldiers, or just people who don't have a lot of experience, new, fresh conscripts. And just always recall that, you know, Germany at the time of their collapse had millions of soldiers. Okay, they still had millions of soldiers at the time of the fall of Berlin. So this really is meaningless. But what I think is concerning the Russians is, number one, Zelensky saying that World War III is going to come unless you help us. That's a threat, of course. I think that's a threat. He's saying, if you don't give us what we want, we're going to do something crazy to trigger the Russians into doing something crazier. And then we might have to get nuclear weapons of our own and start dropping them on Russian cities, which, of course, would beget Armageddon. Apparently, 40% of citizens in Germany are stocking up. I'm curious as to what they're buying. That's what I'd be curious to see. Is this like some sort of trick to stimulate the economy? Like just one last market melt up in commodities? I don't know. But I don't think this is really, truly realized yet. I don't think people are, at least around here, nobody's taking this shit seriously. Okay, yeah, there's a greater, broader interest in preparedness, and I think we have slowly kind of been exposing people to this idea time and time again. I mean, we have about 350 million views on the channel. I'd say maybe about 100 million unique views, and the rest are, you know, people coming back on a regular basis. So that means from my videos alone, you know, we've been able to reach a lot of people with this message that we're living in the age of consequences and you got to get prepared. It doesn't matter what your political persuasion, and it's very important that, you know, regardless of where you're coming from, no matter what walk of life, that you have a plan, okay? And I found it amusing that even the Young Turks now are preparing for, I watched a video with the Young Turks the other day, and I made a post about it, and somebody's like, oh, you watch the Young Turks? I watch everything, man. I don't care if I agree with everything the person says or nothing the person says. I watch everything, especially what I disagree with, because I want to refine my perspective. I want to have valid counterpoints to their arguments. So why wouldn't I watch? It doesn't mean I agree with everything. Anyways, they were talking about preparedness and survival and evasion training of all things, and talking about it in a positive light in reference to prepping for a civil war, which is extremely rare, This is a market cornered by the right wing historically. Now you have leftist, progressive, alt media talking about preparing for civil war, which is rare, very rare. Russian MP advocates for nukes in Cuba. History is repeating. What could go wrong? Now, this is just a Russian MP. So this kind of thing happens all the time. There's always that one guy in parliament. This is like the Lindsey Graham of Russia, okay? Alexei Zarulev is suggesting that placing nuclear weapons in friendly countries near the U.S. in response to alleged U.S. plans to deploy its nuclear weapons in UK. Now, some people are saying that the deployment of U.S. weapons in UK will have a limited impact on the landscape there because, of course, you know, UK already has nuclear weapons and the US has several nuclear weapons, about 100 in fact, in Europe, spread across numerous countries. The real problem is the deployment systems, and I have to drive this point home all the time. If you have fighter jets, if a country possesses fighter jets which are compatible with a certain type of nuclear weapon and they're staunch allies of a nation that has those nuclear weapons, then they're a nuclear target. Like right when you get, because all it takes then is when the shit actually is going to hit the fan. What that means is that all the United States has to do, if they want, they can just fly a few nukes over to Finland and put them on a plane. And the Russians would never really know. So they have to presume that because they have the deployment systems, they have the nukes. Okay? So this is why, you know, all those countries that are, you know, clamoring for F-35s, they know what they're getting themselves into. They've taken a side, and I don't know if it's the best side. And surprisingly, they're not giving Turkey F-35s, even though they have nuclear weapons in Turkey, which kind of tells you it's a bit of an occupation when you really think about it. How can you have nuclear weapons in a place, okay, of all the places, and it's like they wanted to get them as close to Russia as they possibly could? And Erdogan is going to say anything just to, you know, quench the yearning for his population to side with the Gazans and to condemn the Israelis, but that guy is a two-faced snake through and through, okay? They got S-400 missiles, and at the same time, they're going to have F-16s. I mean, this guy doesn't know which way is up and down in terms of geopolitics, but he's going to have to take a side at one point. But I still can't believe that they have nuclear weapons there when, you know, you have S-400s there. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Anyways, that's what's going down. Nuclear weapons in Cuba. I think that's all I got for you guys today. I would strongly encourage you to pay attention to the news cycle because the U.S., according to some reports, is planning on attacking Iranian frigate escorts in the Gulf of Aden as a retaliation for the attack that killed 3 U.S. troops. The Bashad is a command and surveillance ship of the Iranian Navy, which also may be in the crosshairs. That one is patrolling the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. I mean, if they take out an Iranian naval ship, I mean, that's a war. That's a declaration of war. How could they not expect some sort of negative reprisal as a result of that? Get your antibiotics, get your preps. In Europe, they're starting to catch on to what's going on. Interesting how that whole Texas situation is now, it's not diffusing, but it's kind of been taking the back seat now to this new crisis that's emerging. And so that's another win for the Biden administration and more incentive for them to start this war before election season hits. So all I can say is keep on stacking it to the rafters. You know, I was able to get out to the bush today, and I got to admit, I miss doing that stuff. You know, I love doing the current events analysis, but people think that this is easy. People think that this is what I would prefer to do. It really isn't. I prefer to be out there doing gear reviews and just, you know, out there learning the skills, testing out the gear, getting to know people, you know, doing field trips, but right now the news cycle is just so fast paced and information remains a commodity. And unfortunately, I'm worried that the time for that sort of stuff is pretty much over, which is not to say that we're not working very hard to crank out some really high production stuff behind the scenes. But, you know, it's just, I just realized today how much I love just getting out there and just doing that kind of stuff. So we got some of the old school style videos coming out in the next few weeks. So I hope you guys enjoy that. And it's just a reminder too to get out there and don't just, you know, be transfixed by the news 24/7. It's imperative now more than ever before that you're not just consuming your way to preparedness, to you know, fortifying yourself in a preparedness sense. It's important that you're actually getting out there and learning the skills and challenging yourself, taking care of your body and all that good stuff. So we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for watching.